Hello and very warm welcome to the sessions on Indian economy. So today we are discussing a very important topic of Indian economy related to national income. But before going into this particular topic, let's first understand some basics of it and then we will be talking about national income. So first let's talk about the one of the very important economic activity that is known as production. So what do we mean by production? Production of good or production of services. When we say production, mainly we are talking about conversion of raw material into a finished good. So converting raw materials into finished goods, right? Converting raw materials into finished goods. This is known as production, or more general term, we can say converting inputs into output, or for that matter can be outputs as well, right? Now we can talk about agricultural production. In agricultural production also we get food grains etc. by using seeds, fertilizers. So seeds, fertilizer, water that we use for irrigation purposes, these are inputs, and the food grain that we get finally, that is output or raw materials and finished goods. So this is the activity of production, one of the very important activity of production economy, right? Then we can also talk about consumption. What do we mean by consumption? Consumption is also one of the very important economic activity, and this consumption means when we are using goods and services for our ultimate satisfaction or usage, that is known as consumption. When, for example, when we eat food grains, when we wear clothes, when we wear footwear, when we receive education, that is service, right? Goods and service, goods which are tangible, services which are intangible, like education, healthcare, these are intangible. Goods, for example, food, cloth, right? These are goods. So consumption means when we use a particular commodity or services for our self satisfaction. So usage of goods and services, usage of goods and services for self satisfaction, usage of goods and services for self satisfaction, not for satisfaction, right? This is consumption. Now this production and consumption can also happen in market. What do we mean by market? Or in market we can say exchange is happening. What do we mean by exchange? When we purchase these goods and services that we need for our consumption, when we purchase or when producer sells. So when producer sells or when buyer buys, these happens in market. These need not happen in market also. For example, when government is providing free education, so free education, it is not happening in exchange of money, right? So this is also an exchange, but it is happening without market. But exchange mostly happens through market, right? Where producer sells and producer is selling, and when buyer buys, right? So where buyer is buying, right? So this activity is exchange and it happens through market. Welfare governments, for example, if government is going for some welfare activities like providing food grains for free, like providing education for free, healthcare services for free, these are not happening through market, but these are also services that are being provided by the government. Opportunity cost etc, that we will see at some point of time, that what will be the opportunity cost, how it will be transferred to the government, that is the different story. But I hope we have understood these are the economic activities that we can talk about: production, consumption and market. Now when we say GDP, right? When we say GDP, let's understand and decode the definition of gross domestic product. What do we mean by this? What are the concepts involved in it? So gross domestic product, that is GDP. What exactly GDP is, and what are the related concepts? For example, when we say GDP, GDP is nothing but the total value of final goods and services, the total value of final goods and services produced in a domestic territory, produced in a domestic territory of an economy, domestic territory of an economy. You can also say of a country, right? So total value of final goods and services produced in a domestic territory of an economy or a country, right, during a period of financial, during a period of a financial year. This is known as what? GDP. Now let's understand what are the different terms that has been used, different terms that have been used in this definition, and what are the concepts that are hidden in this. So for example, the first thing that we can mark here is total value. So value, right? Then final goods and services, then production, then domestic territory, and then this financial year, right? So these are the things that we have to understand to know more about the GDP and its associated concepts. Now let's first talk about total value. Why we measure GDP in values? See, production is happening in absolute quantity, right? For example, an economy is producing, for example, 10 pens, 3 books, 4 cars, right? For example, these are the production of any particular economy. So production happens in absolute quantity, right? What do? We calculate the value of all these products. We calculate values of all these products, and then we arrive at a value of GDP. We arrive at a value of GDP. Now, why we calculate in terms of value? Because these pens, books, and 4 cars, this will give abstract values, right? If we say what is the production in your economy, so in my economy there are 10 pens, 3 books, 4 cars are being produced. For example, next year these values changes, but we will not be able to compare that whether our GDP is increasing, stagnant, or decreasing, right? That is why we calculate value of it. So this particular year, suppose the value of all these productions is 1000, so GDP is 1000. Next year suppose it becomes 1100, so we can calculate growth in GDP, percentage change in GDP, and then we can arrive at GDP growth. Whereas if we calculate only in terms of absolute quantity of different goods and services, we will not be able to arrive at a concluding point, and we will not be able to compare GDP, right? So that is why we calculate in terms of value, right? Value of GDP. So first point is clear, the total value of final goods and services. Why we calculate value? So that we can track our GDP, whether it is increasing, decreasing, right? Whether the production in the economy is stagnant or not, right? So that different policy measures can be taken, right? So why we calculate value? I hope this idea is clear. Why value? Now let's understand what are final goods and services, right? So when we say goods and services, there can be many types in which we can classify goods and services. So lot many classifications are there, but we have to understand few of them right here. For our purpose here, we need to understand few of them, right? So let's understand what is goods and services. So majorly we can classify goods and services. Majorly we can classify goods and services as consumer goods and services, consumer goods and services, and capital. So capital goods, capital, consumer goods and services, and capital goods. Now let's understand what do we mean by all these. When we say consumer goods and services, or for that matter capital goods, consumer goods and services which we consume for our own satisfaction, right? So when we say consumer goods and services that are being used, or that which are used for ultimate satisfaction, so which are consumed by consumer, which are consumed by the consumer for ultimate satisfaction, for satisfaction, right? This is consumer goods and services, right? For example, I will give you later. Let's first understand what are capital goods. So consumer goods which are consumed by the consumer for satisfaction, and capital goods which are used for further production of goods and services, used for further production of goods and services, further production of goods and services. These are capital goods. Now how do we understand this? See, let's take an example of a car. So there is a car, right? There is a vehicle, car, that you are having. Now you are using this particular car for carrying out for going to college daily, maybe, right? So you are using this particular car for going to workplace, going to college, right? So or roaming here and there. So you are using this car for your self consumption, self satisfaction. You are going to school, you are going to college, you are roaming here and there. So this car is being used for, self purpose, right? So when we say self purpose, that means we are saying this car is being used for consumption purposes, right? Consumption purposes. You are using this car for your own satisfaction. This car becomes what? Consumer good, right? This car becomes what? Consumer good. Now the same car when you are using, for example, taxi services, to provide taxi services. Now you are using this car to provide what? Taxi services. What are you doing here? You are producing further services. You are producing what? Further services using this particular car. So this car is consumer good also. This car is a capital good also. When it is a consumer good, when you are using this for self consumption, when you are using for your own satisfaction, not for further production of goods and services, this particular car become capital good when you are using it to produce further good and services, right? This is the idea. So when this car is being used to provide taxi services, it become capital good. When you are using this particular car to provide to have your self consumption, this become consumer good, right? I hope this example is clear. Now in this example we can introduce one more type of good. Now consumer good and services and capital good both qualify for what? Final goods and services. Now there is nothing like capital services, right? There is nothing like capital services. Services are services, whereas capital goods are those goods which are used for further production of goods and services. Now when we talk about final goods, when we say final goods and services, final goods and services, so both of these, consumer goods and services, consumer goods and services, as well as capital goods, both are part of final goods and services, right? So this is capital. Both are part of final goods and services. Now there is one more classification. Suppose here you are using fuel in car. Suppose you are using petrol, right? This car is using petrol as a fuel, and this fuel will be classified as what? This fuel will be classified as intermediate good. intermediate good. When this will be called as intermediate good? When this particular good is being, petrol is a good commodity, now this particular good is getting exhausted completely. So which gets exhausted completely in production process, which gets exhausted completely in production process, in production process is known as what? Intermediate goods. Production process, this will be called as intermediate goods. Now, when we calculate GDP, we avoid intermediate goods to be taken into consideration. We don't include intermediate goods. Value of intermediate goods will not be taken into consideration while calculating this GDP, right? The reason is intermediate goods, the cost of intermediate goods is already included in the final goods or services, right? So the cost of fuel is already included in your taxi services. That is why we don't include intermediate goods. For example, if there is a tea seller, right? There is a tea seller and this tea seller is using milk. This tea seller is using tea powder, sugar, right? So tea powder, sugar. Suppose these are the inputs. So it is tea seller is using these commodities as inputs, right? Inputs, and it is producing, by using all these inputs, he is able to produce tea. He is able to produce tea. So these are inputs, or you can say raw material, and this is final good. This is what? Final good. Now, when we calculate GDP here, this or output, when we calculate GDP here, we don't include what? Cost of milk, tea powder and sugar. Why? Because cost of tea, suppose you are using milk of 20 rupees, you are using tea of 10 rupees, sugar of 5 rupees, right? Worth 5 rupees. So this is 35 rupees inputs, and you are producing tea and you are selling tea in 100 rupees. Now this 100 rupees production includes what? Milk, tea powder and sugar. So to avoid double counting, the reason why we don't include intermediate goods and services, the reason is to avoid double counting, otherwise they will be counted twice. For example, now if I calculate GDP, I will be calculating tea, production of tea worth 100 rupees, this milk worth 20 rupees, this tea powder worth 10 rupees and this sugar worth 5 rupees, and I will arrive at a conclusion that production has taken place of 135 rupees, which is wrong. Production has taken place only of 100 rupees, right? So this is the idea about final goods and services. Consumer goods and capital goods, both are final goods and services, but we have to avoid intermediate goods and services, right? So I hope this particular idea is clear. Now, so we have seen what are the values, why we are calculating values. We have seen what are final goods and services. Produced, that is production. So we have already seen what is production, converting raw materials into finished goods. Now let's come to a point which is known as domestic territory. Which is known as what? Domestic territory. Let's understand what exactly domestic territory is. So domestic territory of an economy, while calculation of GDP, this domestic territory includes few things. Number one, land boundaries completely. So land boundary of an economy or a country, right? So land boundary, right? Land boundary. Or second thing that it includes is sea boundary. Sea boundary up to 12 nautical miles. 12 nautical miles, NMI. In on land we measure distance in meters, kilometers, and in sea or in water we measure distance by nautical miles, right? So up to 12 nautical miles. For example, this is India, right? This is coastal part of India. So up to 12 nautical mile will be domestic territory, right? Now Land and sea boundary we have seen. Third, when we talk about airline industry, right? Suppose there is an Indigo flight, and Indigo flight is having headquarter in India, and Indigo flight is carrying out a business, and a flight is there. Indigo flight is there from New York, to London, right? Two very famous cities, New York to London. Now, Indigo flight is going there from New York to London. It is not in a domestic territory of India, right? It is outside. The business is or the production of services is happening outside the domestic territory of India, right? But when we say Indigo, which flight is going there? That is Indigo. So Indigo is headquartered in India. Indigo is headquartered in India. So for airline companies, the firms which are involved in production of airline services, for airline industries, there is an exception, right? What exception is there? Airline airline firms, the businesses done by them. So airline firms, the production which is done by airline firms will be calculated under the GDP of the country where it is headquartered. So headquartered nation, the GDP calculation, headquarter nation will include or the production will be calculated under the GDP calculation of headquarter nation, right? For example, Indigo, no matter where the flight is taking place or the production of services, airline services is taking place, no matter where in the world, if it is headquartered in India, it will be calculated under the GDP of India, under GDP of India, right? For example, Qatar Airways. If Qatar Airways is flying from India to, for example, India to Russia, right? So if it is flying between India and Russia, it will be, the production, the value of production will be calculated under GDP of Qatar, right? Not in the GDP of India, not in the GDP of Russia, right? So what we have understood, that airline firms are having exceptions, right? Similar exceptions has been given to airline firms plus shipping firms, right? Shipping corporation. So shipping firms are also having same exemption, right? Similar shipping, because they are also involved in cargo handlings, etc. So when they are also involved in transportation, the value of their production will be calculated under the country where the firm is headquartered, right? So this is about airline and shipping industry. Also, this oil platforms, oil exploration, gas exploration, right? So the firms which are doing oil exploration and gas exploration in international water, not in a territory of a country, right? Not in a land or sea territory of a country. Oil and gas exploration, oil and gas exploration in international water. So oil and gas exploration which do not belong to any particular country. So oil and gas exploration in international waters, international, right? Then one more is there. If oil and gas exploration is there in a territorial water of a particular country, then wherever exploration is taking place, it will be counted under GDP of that particular country. But if it is happening in international waters, then it will be calculated under the GDP of the firms, under the GDP of the country where these firms are headquartered, right? So oil and gas exploration in international water, if it is happening, then firms headquarter will be seen and it will be taken into GDP of that particular country, right? GDP of that particular country which is headquartered, right? So GDP of that country. Now, one more exception is there, that is embassies and consulates. Embassies and consulate. Embassies and consulates. What do we mean by this? Embassy, for example, we are having embassy of different countries in our territory. India is also having its embassies in different countries, right? So for example, India is having its embassy. India is having its embassy in, for example, US, for example, UK, right? For example, Russia, right? So we are having our embassies in different countries. Different countries are also having their embassies in India. What are consulates? Consulates are nothing but branch of embassies. They are nothing but branches of embassies. For example, US is having one embassy in New Delhi, right? US is having its embassy in India in New Delhi, right? US will be having its consulate at many places, like US is having its consulate in Mumbai, US is having its consulate in Hyderabad. So the branches of embassies can be at many places in a country, right, which are known as consulates, and embassies are embassies. So India is having its embassies in different countries. Different countries are also having its embassies in India, right? This is about domestic territory. So when we are having our embassy in different countries, India is having its embassy in US, in UK, in Russia, wherever the embassy is there, it is considered as domestic territory of that particular country. For example, suppose US is having its embassy in New Delhi. Now whatever value of goods and services being produced in New Delhi, that will be calculated under GDP of US. Under GDP of US, not in GDP of India. See, New Delhi is very much inside the territory of India. But since it is embassy of US, embassy and consulates will be treated as the domestic territory of parent nation. So if India is having its embassy in, for example, India is having its embassy in New York, suppose, then in New York, at that particular place will be treated as domestic territory of India, not as a domestic territory of US. So whatever whatever value of production is taking place there, whatever production value has taken place at that particular place, maybe embassy or consulates, that will be taken into the GDP, that will be counted under GDP of India, right? So this is how it is. These are the exceptions that we have seen about domestic, right? Now let's talk about one more thing that is related to financial year, right? Domestic territory we have seen. Now let's talk about financial year, right? What do we mean by financial year? So it is the year, financial year, the period over which government prepares its budget, right? So the period over which government prepares its budget. Budget means where from where government will be receiving money. So what will be the sources of revenue, how much revenue government will collect, right? Estimated value, how much revenue government will collect, how much expenditure government has to do, right? Expenditure government will be doing, right? Estimation of that, and other policies also, and policies, some policies are also being announced in budget. So when government prepares its budget, right? In India, we are having financial year from 1st of April, 1st of April to 31st of March, 31st of March. So suppose if we are into a year there where 1st April 2025, if year starts from 1st April 2025 and it is ending on 31st March 2026, then this period, entire period from 1st April 2025 to 31st March 2026, it will be called as financial year 2025-2026. It will be called as financial year 2025-2026. Now it was started in India from the year 1867. Basically British started this, right? So from the year 1867. British started this. Now, one more information you can consider here, that this one financial year is broken down into quarters, right? Quarter 1, quarter 2, quarter 3, quarter 4. For example, quarter 1, the year starts from April, so quarter 1 will start from April, May, June. April to June will be first quarter. July to September will be second quarter, and then October to December will be third quarter, and then the last quarter will be from January to March. These are 4 quarters in which we divide an year, right? Now, one thing we have to understand, that we have both estimates of GDP, annual estimates of GDP as well as quarterly estimates of GDP. Both are available, but we started calculating quarterly estimates of GDP. Quarterly estimates of GDP this calculation we began in the year 1996. So before 1996, we were not calculating GDP on quarterly basis, right? We started calculating quarterly estimates of GDP from year 1996 onwards, right? Now, we have to understand one thing in this particular concept. Like during COVID, what happened? It came in the newspaper that India is having its first technical recession. Technical recession. What do we mean by this? Technical recession. So what inference you draw? Technical recession. Now, when we say India had its first technical recession, it doesn't mean that India did not see a recession year before COVID. India have seen many recession years before COVID year also. But technical recession means two successive quarters show negative GDP growth. Negative GDP growth. So we started having quarterly estimates of GDP 1996 onwards, and then in COVID year, first time we saw two successive quarters showing negative GDP growth. Earlier, yearly estimates of GDP has gone negative at many point of time. So there were recession years, but those recession years were on annual estimates of GDP, were on the basis of annual estimates of GDP and not on the basis of quarterly estimate, right? So these are the things. I hope we have understood the definition of GDP here. Complete definition of GDP. Total value, final goods and services, production, domestic territory, and financial year. We have understood this. Now, one more concept. Now, let's talk about the concepts that are involved here. We have understood this. What are the concepts involved here? One concept to understand GDP is depreciation. Depreciation. Now, let's understand what depreciation is and how it impacts calculation of GDP. When we say depreciation, it is about the reduction in value. The value gets reduced. For example, tomorrow you purchase a new mobile phone, right, of 60,000 rupees, right? So you have purchased this mobile phone. Now, if you have used this mobile phone for 1 month or 2 month period, now you will not be able to sell this mobile phone in 60,000 rupees, right? The value will get reduced. Either you will be getting 50,000 or 45,000. So your value has reduced. That is depreciated value. For example, if we purchase this particular board, digital screen, we have purchased this. For example, we have purchased this in 1 lakh, right? Now, what is happening? Due to daily usage, its efficiency is declining, or its capacity is decreasing, right? Over the period of time, it will become obsolete. That means it will be of no use, right? Because it's a machine. So machine, capital goods, they are having depreciation. Depreciation means the reduction in value due to normal wear and tear, losses, right, and and foreseen obsolescence. Foreseen obsolescence. What do we mean by this? See, when we say unforeseen, that is the disaster that has taken place. Suppose earthquake, tsunami, etc., avalanche, breakdown, everything. Like whatever natural disaster has caused reduction in value of a machine, then it is unforeseen. But what is foreseen? So suppose, to understand this, suppose we have purchased a machine worth 10 crores. Right, we have purchased a machine worth 10 crores, and the validity of this machine means this machine will be able to function for 10 years. After 10 years it will become obsolete. Becoming obsolescence means becoming obsolete. Obsolete means it is of no use now, right? So we know that this machine worth 10 crores we will be able to use only for 10 years. So what we do basically in accounting purpose, very raw example I am giving you, right? This is value of machine and this is depreciated value. This is depreciated value. Now what we do basically here, for example, here we classify years, number of years. So first year that we have purchased this machine is worth 10 crores, right? Machine worth 10 crores. Now no depreciation in the first year. Next year what we do, we say the value of machine has reduced to 9 crores and 1 crore is the depreciated value. Now what will happen? Second year, this value of machine will become 8 crores and depreciated value will become 2 crores. Right, so every year we are decreasing value of machine by 1 crore, right? So what will happen on at 10th year? 10th year, this value of machine will become 0 and depreciated value will become 10 crores. So where this 10 crore has gone? This 10 crore has depreciated due to normal wear and tear losses. And the foreseen obsolescence, that means we knew that this machine will work only for 10 years. So the value of machine has become 0. So depreciation will give you exact value of your capital good, but it is very difficult to calculate. There are many things that are involved here. It is very complex activity to calculate how much value has been depreciated. For example, you have purchased a mobile phone. Now you want to sell this mobile phone. You have purchased in 60,000 2 months back. Now you want to sell this mobile phone. Now you will say, okay, the value of mobile has been depreciated by 5,000 and I will be selling this phone in 55,000. But the buyer who is willing to buy your phone, he will say, no, depreciated value is 10,000 and now I want to purchase this phone in 50,000. So it is very complex process to calculate depreciated value. But why we are studying this? When we calculate GDP, when we calculate total value of final goods and services produced in a domestic territory of an economy over a period of a financial year, when we calculate complete domestic product, and we don't subtract the depreciated value, we are not subtracting depreciated value, then it is known as gross. Then it is known as gross. When we don't subtract it, when we subtract this, when we subtract depreciation, then it is known as what? Net domestic product. Net domestic product, right? So NDP, net domestic product, and here GDP. So when depreciated value has not been subtracted, it is known as GDP. When we subtract depreciated value, then it is known as NDP. So sorry, this is GDP, this is gross, and this is net, right? When net domestic product, and it is, sorry, net here and gross here, right? Net here and gross here. Is gross. So gross minus depreciation will give us what? Net value, NDP, right? So this is the idea. When we are not able to subtract depreciated value, then we are talking about GDP estimates, gross domestic product. When we are able to subtract the depreciated value, then we talk about net value. So net is gross minus depreciation, right? So these are few concepts related to national income, right? Thank you very much. Take care. Bye bye.